Hey guys, welcome to the Chasing Giants podcast. This week we got a weird situation. We recorded a special firearm episode with the folks from Brenton, and I wasn't sure how to release this. So here's what we're going to do. This episode is our normal episode 245. Then we have the Sunday night prayer time, and then the Brenton episode is at the end of it. So it's going to be almost 2 hours long, and I know a lot of you guys can't watch anything that long, but I needed to get all of the audio together. That way the folks that listen on the phone services could hear the whole thing. We're also going to re-release just the Brenton episode on Wednesday evening at 8 o'clock Eastern time. So I just wanted to explain what's going on. It's a 2-hour download for this one right here, but the first hour is our normal episode. Then we have the Sunday night prayer time, and then the Brenton Firearm episode, which will be at the end. You can watch it however you want this week. We appreciate your support. Here comes the show.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Asio Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Welcome everyone to the Chasing Giants podcast, brought to you by Asio Gear. The man, Don Higgins, is on the screen or on the speakers right now with you, and I'm Terry Peer. This week, we mentioned earlier that we were going to do a double episode with our friends at Brenton Firearms. And Don, talk a little bit about why we wanted to do that. We have a lot of our listeners that are firearm hunters, and why we decided, even though you and I are mostly bow hunters, and we wanted to do something for our gun hunters.
Yeah, we know our audience is a very diverse group, and there's a lot of them that do hunt during the firearm season, and that's how most deer hunters actually started. I know I did, and I used to look forward to the opening day of firearm season the way I looked as a kid, look forward to Christmas morning. So we get it, and even though we no longer do that, we certainly understand it. Then there's a lot of guys like me that maybe use the firearm for management, herd management, shooting does, whatever. I haven't done any of that in the past, but I'm getting ready to this year. I'm going to need to whittle those numbers down, and a firearm's a lot more efficient way to do it than with a bow. So I'll be sitting out there. In fact, I went to buy extra tags for gun season this week. I've got actually 4 firearm tags in my possession now for the firearm season. I hope to fill those with 4 does. No intentions of shooting a buck with the firearm, but I'm hoping to shoot 4 does. But, Brenton's just one of those companies, like all the companies we partner with, it's good people. That's one thing that we demand of any company that we're going to be affiliated with. First of all, they've got to be good people. And then they've got to have a good product that we believe in. And if they fit that 2 criteria, then we want to do everything we can to help them and get the word out. And they're absolutely putting out a top-notch firearm. And a lot of states have legalized rifles. Even the communist state of Illinois, where I live, you can now use a rifle during firearm season. And that's exactly what I intend to do as I'm trying to shoot some does. So it's a good fit. And there's a lot of our listeners that this should appeal to.
And we just got done recording that segment. We're going to play the audio. So those folks who are listening on audio platforms, tech, or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, this episode's going to run a lot longer because I'm going to put the Brenton special episode at the end. So especially all of our Amish Mennonite folks that listen on tech, you'll just have to listen to one long one versus uploading 2 this week. On YouTube, we'll do a couple different things as far as having it on. So make sure you stay tuned to that and listen to that at the end of the podcast tonight. Brent Henderson has our Sunday night prayer time too. That'll also be on there. So a lot of things going on, but I want to tell you something. I learned a lot. This podcast was a lot more than just, hey, here's our rifles. We talked a lot about especially some of these new niche calibers and what drives that from the ammunition side, and then also some talk about triggers and magazines. So very informative. I learned a lot that I think any firearm hunter or enthusiast will enjoy. So stay tuned for that. You got some news this week, and we got a couple announcements, but you got some news this week from a guy who sent you a picture and some video of a spotted fawn, and a fawn that was like just born. So talk a little bit about that. I'm going to put the picture up on the screen in post-production so the folks watching on YouTube can see it. Talk us through this thing. How in the world is there a spotted fawn that's fairly young out there right now?
Yeah, so that was sent to me, but I think it was from someone in Ohio. But that fawn looked to me to be about a month, 6 weeks old, somewhere in there, and it's not as unusual as people think. I've seen smaller fawns on my farm in late November, but if I go back to the days when I had captive deer, there was one year that I watched a buck breed a doe fawn on Valentine's Day, February 14th. And that doe gave birth to a single buck fawn on the last day of August that year. So this fawn the picture was sent to me, I would say it was a little bit younger than that, but I would say that doe would have been bred in late February. My guess is that it was probably a doe fawn that came into heat and she got bred, which is, in February, the bucks are certainly capable of breeding a doe. No doubt in my mind that that's exactly what happened there. So I don't think it's quite as rare as people think. I mean, it's not super common. It's not like we can expect to see it every year in the woods, but it happens every year somewhere. And I have no doubt that's what it was a doe fawn coming into her first estrus in late February, and she gave birth to a fawn sometime in probably early September.
So we have a ton of new listeners that maybe didn't hear us talking about this many episodes ago, but give a brief description of what you mean by a doe fawn coming into her first estrus cycle in February. What causes that to happen that late?
Well, typically with a doe fawn, if she's going to come in heat and get bred as a fawn that first year, or her first winter, typically it's going to happen when she reaches 80 pounds in body weight. And there's theories out there on the second rut, the third rut, and whatever other nonsense people have dreamed up over the years. That there's a second rut a month after the primary rut, and that's when the does that didn't get bred recycle and the doe fawns come into heat. Well, folks, I'm going to tell you that the doe fawns coming into heat it's not centered around any certain time period. It's very random as those doe fawns reach 80 pounds in weight. And my guess, based on my experience, is that the majority of doe fawns that get bred are going to get bred in January. I've seen a lot of rut activity centered around doe fawns in January. In fact, there was one year that I actually killed a buck next to the last day of season in mid-January as he was chasing around a doe fawn that was obviously about to come in heat. In the captive deer, I've seen it all the time. It was January when those doe fawns were coming into heat. So it's basically centered around that doe fawn reaching 80 pounds in weight.
So that 80 pounds in weight, obviously that's not going to apply to like southern Florida, because I mean those deer are a whole lot smaller.
Right.
But I would guess that the nutrition availability that they have, that timing, you might have doe fawns that reach 90 or 80 pounds, mid-November, that you wouldn't see really a difference if there's plenty of food. But in a winter where there's scarce of food, or an area that's scarce of food, it might take them longer. Is that right or not?
Well, it's especially if a doe fawn is born and she's a single. She doesn't have a twin or even be part of triplets. She's getting all her mother's milk, and she's going to grow faster than, say, a set of twins. But, the thing we need to point out about this podcast, I think there's some people that will want to argue with us about things. There's two things that people that are listening need to keep in mind. First of all, our experience is in the Midwest. If you're listening in the South, yeah, some of the things we're going to say probably are not going to relate to your situation in the South. The other thing is we're typically talking about hunting mature bucks. And when we say mature bucks, we're talking about bucks that are at least 5 years old and older. Guys that have never hunted or shot 5-year-old bucks, if a 3-year-old is the best they can do in their state, not talking down to them by any means, but I don't care where you're at. You can be in Michigan or Pennsylvania where they're heavily hunted, and a 3-year-old is not a 5-year-old, period. And I'll argue that till I'm blue in the face. It's just the whole, behavior of those deer is just totally different. A 3-year-old's going to take way more chances than a 5-year-old. And it doesn't matter where he's at. So that's what I think people really need to keep in mind. We're talking about the Midwest, and we're talking about mature bucks 5 and older.
Okay. Yeah, we get some crazy comments sometimes about I don't see that where I'm at, and you're right. It's a couple variables that need to be taken into account. So very cool about seeing that. I mean, I've never seen a spotted fawn in the wild, or captive. I've never seen a spotted fawn this late, but very interesting as people are out. Let's talk a little bit about this coming week starts the Rut Report. And the Rut Report has become a very highly watched nightly unproduced video that you put out because you're in the woods every single day to give feedback back to other hunters about what you're seeing and, trying to correlate weather and different things like that. We're going to do something a little bit different this year. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Rut Report, instead of being posted on my Higgins Outdoors social media, it's going to be posted on Chasing Giants TV social media. So if you're not following that, you need to go to those pages on Instagram and Facebook and follow Chasing Giants TV to stay up to date on those reports. The other thing is, not only am I going to give my observation, but other members of the Chasing Giants TV team are going to be reporting to me what they're seeing. So, I may say today in the woods, I seen great activity this morning, nothing this evening, but West Delks in central Indiana saw just the opposite or something like that. So we're trying to broaden the information we're giving you. So it's not just my area in central Illinois, but we're going to be branching out into other parts of the country to try to make that better.
And we got guys in Illinois, guys hunting in Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Ohio and Indiana. I think that's right. So it's not everybody's going to be hunting every night. You have the ability where you're in the woods almost every night. But at least we're going to have data points from so many other people that come in, and you can summarize those. And I think it's just going to be an interesting baseline for what people want to see as far as what's going on. I think it's going to be neat to have that many data points.
Yeah, without a doubt, it's just going to expand what we've been doing, and that has become very popular in past years on my social media, and I think it's just going to be better. The big difference is people are going to have to go to Chasing Giants TV to see it, and when they do, I hope they see better information than what I've put out in the past because of the expanded coverage. Bringing in the other folks and what they're observing.
Yeah, so make sure you're following Chasing Giants TV on Facebook and Instagram. We do have TikTok, but I'm going to go ahead and warn you, we've already been put on probation like 3 times for talking about deer hunting. So I don't know the future of us and TikTok's going to perfectly align with each other. So make sure at least Instagram and Facebook will have those nightly. This is unproduced, guys. This isn't going to have graphics. This is going to be a hunt update. Live feed same day as what we see things. So we're going to take a break and listen to our spot from Asio, but remember the rut sale is going on right now. And if you need anything for mid or late season, new accessories like the hand muff, which is one of my favorite things Joe's come out with lately, make sure you're going on there. The rut sale is in. There's no coupon code. It auto calculates. The more you spend, the more you save. So check that out and we'll be right back.
Asio Gear has perfected one of the most innovative camo patterns on the market. the unique camo pattern designed to mimic the feather patterns of one of North America's greatest predators, the great horned owl. Combined with intuitive features, superior comfort, and ultra high quality fabrics give bow hunters the ultimate advantage. Asio has outfitted over 10,000 bow hunters across the country with over 1,000 5-star reviews. Visit asiogear.com to check it out for yourself. Use code CHASINGGIANTS for 15% off.
Okay, Don. Well, we've had to wear a variety of different things of our Asio camo pack. We hunted a couple last weekend, and you and I both had our hoodies on, our hooded Asio shirt. Then the next night it was so warm we were hunting in our dry fit t-shirt material. And this coming week, it looks like we had some weather coming in. So this segment that we do before, normally it's just to talk about. I want to do something a little bit different, and I hope our audience looks at it. I'm going to share my screen with Weather Underground and really look at this. And we're recording on Thursday night. I'm getting ready to come to Illinois, so people aren't going to be able to see this until Sunday. But let's just talk about the forecast from tonight through next Saturday, November 2nd, because even though a couple of days are already passed from when people can listen, they can start looking at the trends of what you're seeing, because you're telling me, he's like, hey, this weekend's going to be really great, but plan on probably going back home the middle of the week and then be ready to come back up here next week. Let's just walk through this extended forecast here and point out some things that you observe.
Well, unfortunately, folks are not going to see this podcast or hear this podcast until Sunday. But this Saturday and Sunday looks fantastic. And, one of the things that jumps out at me, well, there's two things that really jump out and make me think that this weekend's going to be great. First, you can see the temperature drop up there. The high on Friday is 70 degrees, and on Saturday and Sunday, it drops down to 60 high. But then if you go down to that second chart and you see the black line down there, and that black line represents the barometer, the barometric pressure, and you can see how that through Saturday and Sunday, that black line is clear up there, at the very top of the chart. That's a great sign. Saturday and Sunday, fantastic hunting this weekend. Again, unfortunately, people are not going to get to see this until after Saturday, or Saturday's going to be past anyway. But then we get into the first of the week, and you see the temperature rising. Monday it's 71, but Tuesday and Wednesday, 2 days that the temperature's in the low 80s and very windy. Those are 2 days that I am probably not even going to go to the woods whatsoever. I'm going to be resting up on those 2 days, and I'm going to be preparing for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And you can see we got rain coming in all 3 of those days. But look what the temperature does from Wednesday, a high of 82, to Thursday, a high of 68. And then it even goes down even more on Saturday to 61 as a high. And that rain is much needed, so I definitely hope we get it. But we got a good weekend this weekend. First 3 days of the week are definitely going to be slower, especially Tuesday and Wednesday. But Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, as we look at Halloween through the first couple of days of November, it ought to be on fire. And I don't know, I haven't seen the forecast out past that, but if it stays cool, there's going to be several days of great activity. But here's what I want to warn people about. That weather is going to warm back up at some point. And even though, like on Thursday and Friday, we're right there at the end of October, 1st of November, and everybody thinks of the rut as mid-November, I'm telling you, these days, Halloween, first couple of days of November, could be better than the peak of the rut in mid-November if that peak of the rut, the temperature is higher. Starting right now on through the entire month of November, you need to be looking at the temperature. And I know I've heard of studies and whatever that saying temperature doesn't matter during the rut, blah, blah, blah. I'm telling you, it does matter during the rut. Weather trumps everything. I get asked about the moon all the time and this and that. weather trumps absolutely everything. And when you see these cold fronts come in where the temperature drops 10 degrees or so, and especially if it gets below normal for that time of year by a little bit, it's going to be just hot as can be in the deer woods as far as the activity goes. There's a couple periods on this 10-day forecast that have me excited this weekend and the end of the week.
Well, like you said, part of this will already be passed by the time people are looking at it, but I think it's a great visual, and we haven't ever done this on the podcast before, where we're looking at different things, and they can look at these patterns in future weeks. But let's talk a little bit about the difference in, obviously it's a little bit colder on this Saturday and Sunday, the 26th and 27th, than November 1st and 2nd, but we still have a huge temperature drop. So from where we're high, you're talking, at least 10, sometimes 15% temperature drop. Explain this high pressure, because we also have a temperature drop next weekend after that rain, but the pressure stays fairly low. Will that pressure rise after that rain goes through, or do you think that'll matter that much?
Well, I don't think that's going to matter because of the time of the year it is. When you got the two factors going for you, you got cooler temperatures and you got the rut.
Yeah.
So those are the two things that are really going to drive things there. But on this chart, if you go back to Saturday and Sunday, the 26th and 27th, when those two lines, when the black line goes in the second chart goes sky high, and the red line, which is the temperature, goes down, and those two lines come close together, like you can see right there where Terry's got his mouse or cursor. That's what you want to see. And then you get into those days like Tuesday and Wednesday, see how far apart the red and the black are there. That's when things aren't near as good.
And you got 23 mile an hour winds.
Yeah, add that to it, just another negative factor. But then we get into that cold front that's coming in at the end of the week, and you can see the lines are starting to come together a little bit more. Now, not near as much as they are this weekend, but still the temperature is the big thing right there.
Yeah, interesting. So, yeah, if you find this kind of content, looking at this, we've never done this before. If you find it interesting, leave a comment down below. We can actually make this short segment of what our podcast is every week, looking at the next week's forecast. If you find that interesting, the problem, Don, is a lot of our listeners, they schedule their rutcation and when they leave to go on hunting trips, way in advance. So they really have to roll the dice when it comes to whatever the weather ends up being. But for the guys that can sneak away, take half-day vacation to hunt their house, or maybe their hunting ground is a little bit closer, these types of extended forecasts, we're using Weather Underground. I think this is the website you look at, right?
It is, yeah. And the thing that I was really trying to point out there was the last day of October, the first couple days of November, depending on what the weather does after that, that could be the best time of the whole year. If that weather turns warm again and stays warm throughout the rut, there'll literally be more activity that first couple of days than there will be on November 15th. The temperature plays such a huge role during that rut, and the daylight activity. Now, the does are still going to come in heat at the same time, but the daylight activity that we're going to witness as we sit in our stands is going to be dictated by the temperature as much as anything.
It makes sense, but I thought it was a really good visual for everybody. And, like I said, leave a comment if you like that kind of content. We can try to do that every week. You guys help us. Let us know what you'd like to hear more of. Before we get going, let's take a quick break and listen to the folks at Midwest Land Group, and then we'll come back with our listener-submitted questions for the night.
Ever had a terrible real estate experience? Average realtors usually spend more time selling themselves than on selling your land. They'll tell you anything to get the listing. They know that if they get the listing, you're stuck with them. Not here. Midwest Land Group has changed the way land is sold and is the only brokerage to offer a 100% satisfaction guarantee. That means if we don't meet your expectations, you can fire us. That puts all the pressure on us to perform. We don't just list land, we sell it. If you're looking to buy or sell property, don't before you talk to us. Visit us at MidwestLandGroup.com.
Well, Don, not only did we talk about some new things going on at Brenton with some Chasing Giants extended partnerships. I hope you listened to that segment that we just recorded with Brenton. That'll be after this episode. But we also have some other calls this week. We got a lot of announcements that are on the verge of being released that we're really excited about. And I think what's going to end up happening is this Shipshewana show is going to end up being a pivotal piece to a lot of big announcements and releases as we move forward with Chasing Giants for 2025. So just like Brenton talked about, if you're still thinking about going to this show, they said it on the podcast when we recorded a little bit ago. This is one of the most special events in the hunting industry, I believe. The way people act, the camaraderie, the types of exhibitors that are there. If you're looking for a trade show like what they used to be, to come out and obviously the entertainment's going to be phenomenal with the Wenzel brothers, Bobby Worthington, Al Foster, you and Joe Miles in different, there's even going to be different breakouts with each of those guys. So please make sure you're looking at your calendars for the Midwest Sportsman's Classic in February in Shipshewana. And if you're interested in being a exhibitor, you need to get in touch with them immediately, as booth space, I believe, is close to being sold out. So I can help you connect with those folks if you're interested in that. So let's move on to our first question of the night, and I'll turn it back over to you, Don.
Okay, the first one comes from Dan Schultz from Brillion, Wisconsin. It says, hello, gentlemen. Congratulations, Don, for closing the deal on Zacchaeus. I am looking forward for the video to come out. After the harvest, you stated that you field dressed Zacchaeus and took him to be processed. Don, did you field dress him where he fell and leave the gut pile? Or did you move the gut pile to an area of your farm where the increased predator activity would not have a negative impact on your sanctuary? Do you feel that gut piles increase predator activity to a point where it negatively affects the deer? Would your stance change if you hunted in an area where wolves and bears were also common? Thank you for taking the time to answer my question, and I hope you both have a fantastic rest of your season. Well, Dan, I probably have a different field dressing approach than most people listening to this podcast, especially on my home property. I'm now on permission properties. Typically, I just field dress the deer wherever he lays. But on my home farm, when a deer is down, and it typically doesn't matter if it's a doe or a buck or what or where it's at on the farm, I go for the skid loader. I drive the skid loader through the brush and whatever, right to the deer with a bucket on it. I drop the bucket and roll the deer into the bucket, and I take it out whole, and then I field dress it back at the farm. And so at my place, I've got my home site, where there's my house and a couple of outbuildings, but down the road a quarter mile is where our old house was, and I've got some, cattle barn and a couple pole buildings down there, and that's where I go to field dress my deer. I just take them to the hydrant. I've got a water hose right there as I do it. I put on some shoulder-length veterinarian gloves that the vets use to pregnancy check cattle. And when I'm done field dressing a deer, I usually don't have a drop of blood on me. I might have some on my boots, maybe get a little bit on my clothes, but my hands are clean because I'm wearing those gloves. And the thing I really like about it is I get to rinse that deer carcass out. So I take that garden hose with that cold water, and I literally let it run through that deer's body cavity until I've got clean water running out, not bloody water. I keep washing that thing out, and that water is cold this time of the year. It helps to cool the meat. I'll run that cold water over the hams of that deer, and I may let that water run through that deer for 5 or 10 minutes as it's clear, just rinsing that deer out and cooling him off, and then I'll hang him up. But I know most people don't have the same option that I do. I just thought I would throw that out in case for those folks that do. There's a lot of folks that, they've got a tractor with a bucket or something, and where they could do the same thing, haul that whole deer out and do the field dressing, back at the cabin or whatever. And to be honest, with what do I do with the guts? I just leave them right there by the hydrant. And I'll tell you what, the critters, between the stray cats and the possums and whatever else, it's cleaned up in a hurry. So I've shot so far this year 2 does and a buck, field dressed them all right there by the hydrant, left the guts right there. And today there's very little left of it. I mean, so that's what I do. I realize it's totally different than most people can do. But if you can, I would get them out of the woods just like that and field dress them elsewhere. You asked about bears and wolves and if I would do it any different. Well, I don't have any experience whatsoever with bears and wolves, but if I could get the deer out whole, I would, no matter what area of the country I lived in or what predators I was dealing with.
We don't have to deal with that, fortunately. But yeah, I mean, people hunt back in public, or they have a really long drag where it's impossible to get the deer out without lightening it up. I totally get why people, have to gut it where they lay. But I'm like you, if I can use machinery to help me and not have to lift. I tell you, one of the things that I bought that I keep in the back of my truck year round is one of those deer sleds. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about or not, but they actually are the same mold as ice fishing sleds, except they have a camo pattern on them. And if it's nothing else other than lifting a deer in the back of a truck, I don't know if anybody else has struggled with it. You get your buddy up in, grabbing the antlers, and then the guy on the back trying to, get it up. These, especially, our GMC Duramaxes, the tailgate seems like it gets higher and higher every year. But getting a deer up in the back of a truck is a nightmare. So these sleds, when you roll them in, lifting a deer up like you're just picking up a pallet or something, it's really, really nice. So I actually keep that in the back of my truck all year, so it comes in handy.
Cool. So our next question comes from...
I got those out of order, so remind me if I put the question up twice. So,
all right. This one comes from Tyler Thompson from Norma, Illinois. I don't know if that's supposed to be normal or Norma, but it says Norma. So he says, Don and Terry, on all the properties you have consulted on, were there any that you thought were already set up and hunted well? How were they when they got there or close to it? I'm curious to hear what you have to say. I know each farm varies greatly. Thank you, Tyler. I have never been to a property where I didn't have some suggested changes. I have been to properties where the client had done a bunch of things right, and I didn't have to make near as many suggestions as I typically would. But I've never been to a property where I didn't have to make any suggestions. And it just, like you mentioned, it varies greatly. I've been to properties where it's going to take the client a few years to get everything done and to see real benefit. I've been to others where I give them a list of things to do that could easily be done in a month's time, and they start seeing real benefits right away the very next season. So I never seen one that I wouldn't change something. And with that in mind, I've been on my farm, well, my whole life, but as far as managing it for deer and trying to set it up for deer, I've been doing it here for over 30 years now, and I still sit in my tree stands every fall and take notes as I sit there. If I just do this one little thing here, this stand would be just a little bit better. There's no substitute for time on a property. So even if I go to a property that is pretty well set up, if you're a serious land manager, you should be sitting in your stand continually thinking of things that would make your property just a little bit better. And the time that a person spends on their own property can never be duplicated by hiring someone to come in for a day. Now, sure, they're going to provide ideas that you maybe didn't think of, but a lot of my clients take my ideas and build on them, and they'll contact me later and said, hey, you said to do this. What if instead I did this instead? And I might say, yeah, that's a great idea. That I see nothing negative about doing it that way. But I've never seen a property that I didn't think could be improved somehow.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. All right. Get the next one up here.
This one comes from Ryan Richardson from, well, it doesn't even say where he's from.
Nope, it didn't have it on it.
It says that this is a perfect opportunity for me to say something. Guys, we get a lot of questions in every week, and I'm trying to pick things that we haven't answered before, if possible, people that are thinking outside of the box. But, I mean, I can't tell you how many submissions every week we get where the address is wrong. In other words, where it's supposed to be the address, they put in their email address, or they don't put the town they're from or whatever. Guys, if you don't completely fill out the form, we can't send you a T-shirt. So we may use your question. That don't mean you're getting a T-shirt, though. So Ryan says, hey, Don and Terry, enjoying the podcast and congratulations on your 2024 target buck. I know in recent podcasts you've been talking about wind and how bucks use it going to bed in the morning, but I've not heard much about how a buck might leave his bed in the evening. I might be overthinking this, but it seems like the way he leaves his bed might be totally opposite from the way he entered it. Yet it seems like sometimes they only have one way in and one way out. Thanks in advance. Well, Ryan, I can tell you a couple things. First, rarely does a buck have one way to exit his bed. If he did, he would just be way too vulnerable to predators. So a buck, wherever he's bedding, he's typically got multiple exit routes that he could utilize if forced to. You do bring up a good point of how a buck, when he exits his bed in the afternoon and how he uses the wind. And I'll tell you, Steve Shields is here at my house right now. We've been filming for the last couple of days. And one of the videos that we filmed is the Zacchaeus hunt. And this hunt is really going to it's going to show from an aerial view how this buck utilized the wind and how I beat him even when he was using the wind. And it's really critical. So in the afternoon, when a buck gets up, first of all, if he doesn't have a wind that's comfortable for him with the direction that he wants to go, he'll typically just lay there till dark, and he'll let the cover of darkness keep him safe. If he can't use his nose to keep him safe, he will use the cover of darkness to keep him safe most of the time. This hunt for Zacchaeus is going to be really interesting and really educational for the viewer. That video is going to be more education than entertainment. I can tell you that. And the wind is a huge factor in that. But don't expect a buck to get up in the afternoon and just start marching out. Because he checked the wind coming in that morning doesn't mean he's going to leave on the exact same trail. And if the wind didn't change, he would be giving up the wind. He's going to wait until it's dark, or he's going to move in a direction where the wind is in his favor. Now, the other thing I want to really point out, and this is very critical, is that the more hunting pressure or human intrusion that buck has encountered, the less likely he is to give up the wind. If it's a farm where there's very little hunting pressure, a sanctuary type area where he doesn't encounter human intrusion, he is way more likely to take a chance with the wind. The more pressure he's under, the less chances he's going to take with the wind. So keep that in mind. And I'll just say this, I think most of our listeners are probably hunting bucks that are under a fair degree of hunting pressure, maybe a lot of pressure. Don't be expecting your bucks to give up the wind. You're just going to have to figure out how to play the wind based on where he's bedding at. And again, this Zacchaeus video, when it comes out, and it's going to come out here in November. I think we're still trying to time that with the release of the new Matthews bow on November 19th. We might release our video a day later or something. I'm not sure, maybe the same day. We're working out the details on that with Matthews, but that video is going to be very educational about how that buck used his nose. He thought he was doing everything right, and actually he was doing everything right. I just happened to be just off to the side enough where he didn't catch my scent when he came in.
Yep. All right. Great explanation. And yeah, make sure you stay tuned in November. we can't show that bow that Don shot Zychaeus with until after Matthews releases the bow. So that's why we're waiting until after that. So we can show the full hunt and not worry about any of the blurring out or blacking out any part of the video. So stay tuned for that video next month.
The next question comes from Anonymous, but he's from Ohio. So he says, hello, Don and Terry. I've been thinking this in my head for a while now and want to run this by you guys. In regarding property management, I have always wondered how many deer we push away with the human intrusion doing property management. If you think about what properties that hold a lot of deer, it is the properties that someone owns that don't allow hunting. I always thought it would be interesting by two pieces of similar properties doing property management on one, food sources, bedding, etc., and the second property completely stay off and hunt only when the conditions are right. I love doing property management myself. This is just something that I have always wondered. Thanks for all you guys do. God bless. Well, absolutely. How many times have you heard me say freedom of human intrusion? It's the most critical piece to a deer hunting property, and yet it just blows my mind that we've got people out there acting as consultants, charging people, and they're telling them, oh, you can do anything you want on your property up until about 30 days before season. And I'll go back to something we said earlier in this podcast. We're talking about mature bucks. When you listen to Chasing Giants, we're giving you advice on chasing mature bucks 5 years old and older. And guys, when it comes to those kinds of deer, human intrusion is absolutely the number one factor that is going to determine your success on managing a property. And when you think about it, freedom of human intrusion costs you absolutely nothing. It takes absolutely not a minute of your time, and yet people cannot do it. A lot of people that own a hunting property just cannot stay off. And I'm guilty to a certain degree myself, but I figured out, I think what really helped me is that by the time I was able to have my own property, I had already ruined literally dozens and dozens of properties over the years by my own human intrusion. I'm talking about back in the days when I was younger, there was very few bow hunters, and I could get permission on 8 or 9 out of every 10 properties I asked for permission. And when I did, I was the only guy there during archery season. I would burn out them properties. I would ruin them. Most of what I learned the hard way because I did it wrong. And I failed time after time after time. And finally, I figured out what I was doing wrong, so I would change things. And the thing that I was doing wrong on those properties that I ruined years ago was I was putting too much pressure on it. And it was just me. It wasn't me and a dozen other guys going in to bow hunt that property. It was me by myself. And what it taught me was how little human intrusion it takes to ruin a property, to bump all the mature bucks off, not only the mature bucks, but it really took very little human intrusion to bump the does and all the deer herd off a property and totally ruin it for the season. And I remember for years and years, I would go through property after property after property in one season because, I would start hunting it and there'd be deer everywhere. And by the time I'd hunted that property for 2 or 3 weeks, I'd run them all off and it was time to go find another property. And human intrusion is just it. I mean, you talk about comparing two properties, one where absolutely nothing is done. You think about the parks and such where we have deer, today that are halfway tame. You drive through and there's deer just standing there in the ditch, eating grass in the ditch or whatever, and they're hardly afraid of humans. They've been conditioned that way for generations after generations of freedom of human intrusion. A lot of these places, some of these areas are off limits to human traffic at all. Now others, they get used to the human traffic, campgrounds, walking trails, things like that. They've learned that those people do not pose a threat to them in that particular location. But a lot of it is just areas that are totally free of human intrusion. And that's what we got to try to duplicate on the properties that we're managing for big mature deer. I mean, you can get away with some things with 3-year-old deer that you're never going to get away with 5-year-old deer.
Yeah. All right. Great question. Before we go to the next one, with so many new listeners, I actually got a phone call this week. Remind people if they don't have access to internet and they want to submit a question, how they do that before we go and I get the next one ready.
Yeah, so you can submit questions by mail. You can just, write your question. Be sure to put your name, address, and the size of T-shirt that you wear. And you can mail that to Real World Wildlife Products. And the address is P.O. Box 55 in Arthur, Illinois. The zip code is 61911.
Yep. Here's the next question up on the screen for you.
This one comes from Alex Dunleavy from Monroe Center, Illinois. It says, "Hi, Don and Terry. With some of the best hunting just around the corner, my question is, when can hunters start to get aggressive and start to hunt our rut stands? Getting into those stands close to bedding and playing the wind, does morning hunts come into play? Also, with the forecast looking like warm weather the next 10 days and no cold fronts in sight, what are some key factors when choosing days to hunt, warm pre-rut or rut days? Is it a stray shower coming through, maybe an increase in wind speed, or is it just a matter of sitting all day waiting for an opportunity? Thank you and God bless." Well, Alex, I think we went through the 10-day forecast as it stands today. Your question was submitted prior, before we could see these cold fronts that Terry and I just showed earlier in this podcast. When should we start hunting morning stands? Well, based on what I'm seeing, I'm going to wait until Halloween. Halloween morning will probably be my first morning hunt. I think a case could be made for going this Saturday and Sunday. Again, that's going to be before this podcast releases, so it's going to be too late for people to do that. But I'm going to wait, and because I think that period, that first few days of November, last day of October, could very well be the best time of this whole season as far as rut hunting goes. Now, I personally think the late season can be a great time to hunt, if you get the right weather, but everything's weather dependent. Early season, we're looking for cold fronts. During the rut, we're looking for weather patterns, cold fronts. Late season, cold fronts. Cold fronts is just a consistent weather pattern that a deer hunter should be looking for throughout the entire season. It just increases daylight deer activity, and it's no different during the rut. So I would start hunting mornings. And again, this is based in central Illinois. If you're farther east or west, that could shift a day or two either way. But that's what I'm going to start hunting mornings. And basically, I'm going to be hunting my rut stands, just like you talked about, downwind edge of doe bedding areas and on those morning hunts. I'm not going to be on a food source in the morning hunt. It's going to be back along the edge of some bedding cover on the downwind edge. And a lot of times those bucks, especially on a cold morning, you get a cold, frosty morning. You look for those nights when the wind's not blowing, those cold, still nights. That's when you get a good frost. If the wind's blowing, you don't typically get a good frost. You get a real still night where you're expecting frost, that next morning can just be on fire with deer activity. But a lot of times those bucks don't get back to that bedding cover until 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. They'll be, searching for does. The sun may come up and they may find themselves a long way from where they intended to bed that day, and they're rushing to get back home or whatever. So it's time, this coming week, it's time to start hunting those rut stands, but make sure you've got the weather in your favor too.
Well, Don, thanks for all the advice tonight. I enjoyed that weather discussion. I don't know about everybody else, but that was pretty cool to look at that extended forecast. I'm curious what other people will look at or comment on below. Before the Brenton special episode releases, there's going to be a Sunday night prayer time with Brent Henderson, and I want you to talk about Brent just a little bit. He just got done doing a men's retreat in your area. I just got done recording his podcast this week that just aired. I ended up going on a little bit of a political rant And yeah, it was a lot of fun. But Brent I made a Facebook post that we highly recommend him if any church or men's group or wild game dinner, anytime that you're ministering to men through the outdoors, he's your guy if you're looking for somebody.
Yeah, Brent was just at my church here at the end of September, less than a month ago, actually, and we had him on a Friday evening men's retreat. So on Friday evening, we had a steak supper, and he came in and spoke. And then on Saturday morning, he was back. We had a breakfast, and he spoke, and we was out of there before noon. And then he also gave the sermon on Sunday morning. So any of you guys listening, if your church is looking for a speaker, Brent's your guy. He's been all over the world hunting and fishing. I mean, from Alaska, Africa, you name it, he's been there. Originally from Pennsylvania, but lives in Indiana right now. Just a fantastic individual. His faith is extremely important to him, but he's also got the adventures in the outdoors to share, to bring those stories to life. You know, he ties it in, with a biblical message. So if you're looking for a speaker for your church, men's event, wild game dinner, anything, I highly recommend Brent Henderson.
And you can learn more about Brent at unleashed.men website. He has a YouTube channel that both Don and I did an episode with him here recently, so you can go check those out. And stay tuned to his Sunday night prayer time, which will be right at the end of this episode before the Brenton episode. So this is going to be a long upload, probably close to 2 hours for those folks who are listening to it all in one file. But yeah, you're going to be making a run to Kansas City area this week, if I'm not mistaken, aren't you?
Well, potentially. I'm waiting to hear back from Chris Yates. My truck's ready to be traded in. I already got some miles racked up on it, and I think Chris might have me a truck, but we'll see. If we get into November, it's going to be hard for him to pull me away to come get a truck, but I'm thinking one of them warm, windy days here this week would be a perfect time for me to drive and pick up my new truck.
You know, you keep saying you're going to slow down and not put as many miles on a truck. Maybe that'll happen one day. I'm sure Chris will like it when you do.
Well, next year. That's next year.
Always next year, right?
Always next year.
Right. Yep. Good luck to everybody getting ready to gear up for the rut. I wish you the best. Be safe.
God bless everyone. See you back here next week.
Wildlife Farming is the leading e-commerce platform specializing in habitat management equipment. Our mission is to make available the equipment necessary for the development of wildlife habitat and improve conservation for hunting and recreational property. We carry flagship brands like the Genesis Drill and Goliath Roller, as well as the premier brands in planting, mowing, spraying, forestry management, and fencing equipment. Food plot and habitat goals vary. Wildlife Farming is the company that can deliver the equipment to achieve these goals. Equipment is our specialty. Our staff is trained and familiar with all the tractor and skid steer brands to make sure you get the right piece of equipment to get the job done right the first time. At Wildlife Farming, we only sell quality equipment, and we have the support and expertise you need. Please visit wildlifefarming.com for all of your equipment needs.
Hey guys, welcome back to Sunday Night Prayer Time with Chasing Giants. Those of you that know me know I love stories. I love to hear stories. I love to tell stories. I think stories are one of the most powerful way that we have of communicating something we want to stick in someone's mind, especially truth. And so I, just like Jesus would use parables and stories, I found the power in that. You know, I speak all over the country, and the way that I get my points across is through setting a story, up to put you on the edge of your seat, but then giving you that aha moment at the end. I don't always have to give you the answer. I just have to ask the right question. And I think that's important for all of us to remember because, right now we're going through a time where our country is divided, Democrat versus Republican, all these different things. And we're trying to convince each other that my way is right. And I think sometimes all we have to do is just put the truth out there, maybe even in the form of a question. and allow the other person to kind of contemplate it, think it through. Look at their own experiences and see how it might apply. So I want to take the next few minutes, and I want to tell you guys a really powerful story a couple powerful stories actually. But I was, probably around 2006, I had a chance to go over to Africa, and we were doing safari. We were doing also photo safari and camping out under the stars, and seeing the Iron Cross at night. And there was a book that I had read, given to me by a friend back then. And there was a spot in Kruger National Park. There's a little place called Balule. And I wanted to visit Balule on this trip because in this book, back just after the turn of the 1900s, there was a park ranger by the name of Harry Woolhutter. And he was on horseback. He had his dog Bull with him, and they were riding up a dried up creek bed in Kruger National Park. And they were, mapping things out and just kind of discovering new lands. And he came across a bend on this one river near this little place called Balule. And when he came around the bend, what he didn't know was lying in wait were 2 male lions. Now remember, lions hunt in pairs. Typically, it's the females that are the hunters, but they always hunt in pairs. And there's a reason for that. Because those of you that love to hunt, you know how a deer can use their nose. They can that almost 300 million scent receptors they have. They can pick us out pretty quick. Well, dogs have like 220 million, and so you have that. What I want to say in the animal kingdom, they trust their nose very well. And so what they were trying to do is you have one lion that is upwind and one that is downwind of you because they want their prey to get the smell and try to run in the opposite direction, and that's where the other lion is waiting. So as Harry came around this corner on his horse with his dog, there was one lion that he had no idea was there, and the other lion, the horse began to buck, freaked out because it smelled the lion, and when that lion jumped out of the long grass, it immediately went after the hindquarters of the horse. Harry was thrown off the back of the horse, and his gun was still, on the side of the horse as the horse took off, and the first lion was gone. But that wasn't the end of the story because there's 2 lions. As Harry is trying to get his composure as he hits the ground, the second lion is on him on the count of 1. And there's nothing he can do. The lion bites down through Harry's shoulder. It sinks his, they've got 4-inch canines. I mean, you hold up your finger, and that's how big those things are in a lion's mouth. And they've got 4 of these. It sank it right down through Harry's collarbone, broke his shoulder, and instantly paralyzed his left side. Well, he's being dragged across this dried up creek bed by a 600-pound lion. And you have to imagine the size difference. It's almost like if your house cat was dragging a mouse. And as it's walking, you can just see that thing walking with him between the front legs as he's being drugged. Harry knows that if he tries to do anything and try to fight back in any way, it's only going to be a matter of minutes until that lion's breath smells like him. But as he's being drugged, he has to think quick because he knows if he does nothing, that's going to be the end of his life. And he remembers that he has a sheath knife hanging down on his thigh. And as the lion is walking forward, he times it so he's allowed to, he can let that good arm hang down to his side, feels the sheath knife, and as that lion stride moves forward with that front leg, Harry draws that sheath knife out and plunges it twice up into the lung cavity of this lion. As soon as the lion drops him and roars, he takes that knife and puts it up into the neck and hits the jugular vein. Well, long story short, he ends up killing the lion. They have to light flight him out of there. He had another friend who was behind on another horse. They find him. He'd been up in a tree. He belted himself in from loss of blood. He was afraid he was going to pass out. But I wanted to go back to this spot because Harry was a survivor. They got him. They had to put him on a scabbard, drag him behind a horse for a long way until they could get him out of there and get him to help. And this was somewhere around it was in the 1912 time period. And I said, I want to go back to that spot while we're here. So we went to this little place called Balule, and it was about maybe an acre of land that had a chain link fence around it. You've got 2 lion prides that are right there. I think is it the Limpopo pride and the Timbavati lions or whatever. But there's only 2 of us. We get there. The guard is locking the gate, and we said, hey, we wanted to spend the night because you can camp there. But there was nobody there. He says, you know what? I'm going to lock the gate up behind you guys. I'll be back in the morning. But you just have at it. So he leaves, the gate's locked. It's about an 8-foot tall chain link fence with maybe 3 feet of barbed wire on top of it. Now, this is the home of the Big Five. So it's a little bit iffy, right? I mean, when you've got things like, the rhino, and you've got the lion, you've got the Cape buffalo, you've got the elephant, you've got the leopard, it's a little bit different than walking into the whitetail woods here. We really don't have to think much about anything. So we get our tent set up, a little 2-man tent. I get an ironwood fire going. We had a cooler that we had some meat with us. And I get some of the burger, and I put them on top of this fire I've got going on the grill top. And the smell as it's getting dark, it's drifting up, and it's going over the top of that fence, going back into the African bush. And we both get our chairs, and we both kind of lean back, and I'm just looking at the stars. It's a whole different hemisphere. You're not seeing, the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. You're seeing the Iron Cross. It's amazing. It's like watching the Lion King, only you get to be in it. And the thing about Africa is different than here is because everything there wants to stick you or kill you. So it's a totally different environment. So as this almost like a magic potion is drifting and it's going up above above that fence, I'm just kind of sitting there and I'm paying attention. It's gotten dark, and I'm looking at the glow of the fire that's kind of shining through the chain link fence. We had in front of us was maybe only about 10 yards in front of us. And as that fire is flickering, I start to notice these golden eyes about 3 feet off the ground, and they're just staring right through me. And I kind of look over at my buddy Wade, and I said, "Do you see this?" As that animal turned sideways, it was a full-grown male spotted hyena, and they are way bigger than you're thinking they are. And he was pacing back and forth, and pretty soon he comes up and he lifts his leg and he marks his territory against the fence. It was the smell of the meat that drew him in, but he's going to mark his territory. Well, as soon as he marks his territory, we kind of laugh and we look at it. It's kind of a nervous laughter. And we kind of look at each other. And my buddy goes, "What are you going to do about that?" I said, "I'm going to mark my territory." So I go walking down to the fence. I've got a fence between us, and I mark my territory. I kind of come back. We're getting a good laugh at it. And pretty soon that hyena comes back up and he marks his territory right where I had marked mine. My buddy goes, "Now what are you going to do about it?" And I said, "Hey, it's okay. I saved a little." So I go walking back down to the fence to mark my territory again, and all of a sudden that hyena turns tail. He's gone back into the African bush. And I'm thinking, was he afraid of me? And then I hear it. Whoa, whoa. I can hear this full-grown male lion coming in. It's hunt time. And the hyena was by himself. Now, you get a cackle of hyenas together, they'll take on a full-grown male lion. But when you have a lion that are so fierce, they know who they are. They are the king of the beasts. And you've got just one hyena, he's gone. Because a lion will never, ever bow to a hyena. And Jesus will never, ever bow to the enemy. In my book, The Roar Within, I started off the book, and it said, one of the quotes in the beginning said, "Oh, the power revealed the moment the lion cub roared and understood who he really was." You see, a lion doesn't get its roar from how many kills that it makes, right? God put that roar in that lion. It didn't have to earn it. So when you think about believers, so many times there are certain denominations, certain people, belief systems, theologies that will teach you that it's what Jesus did on the cross, but it's also about your works. Anytime that we add our works, which the Bible says are like filthy rags, anytime we add that to our good enough, that it doesn't just come from Jesus and what he did for us, we're buying into the big lie. I've talked about that before. The big lie simply says this, that my performance plus other people's opinions equals my self-worth. It's a lie from the pit of hell. God imputed, he put that roar in that lion. And the moment that we truly believed, out of Ephesians chapter 1, I think it's verses 13 and 14, he put his promised Holy Spirit in my spirit. Now, that is my one true identity. So the 3 words I want you to remember for today are identity, identity, and identity. Because there's nothing more important. That is like Harry Walhutter's 9-inch sheath knife, that weapon that he needed to get the job done. We can try and do everything that we can do in our own power, but when it comes down to it, the only weapon that we have against the enemy is the Word of God. It's his presence, his Holy Spirit is in us. Understanding that we have everything that we will ever need in him, not in our own power, is that weapon that we need to defeat the enemy. I was speaking for a 12-step Celebrate Recovery one night. And this first guy gets up to introduce the evening, and he says, "Hi, my name is Tom." He says, "I'm a believer in Jesus Christ." He says, "I'm a sex addict and an alcoholic, and with that, I pass." And as I was sitting there, something didn't sit right with me when I heard him say that. So we break into small groups. I happened to go to Tom's group that night, and he starts off and he says, "Hey, I gotta confess something." He says, when I said that, he told everybody he'd been sober for 18 months when he did his introduction. He said, "I lied." He said, "I haven't even been sober for 18 hours. He said, "Last night," he says, "I was angry at my wife, and I got up in the middle of the night, and I went out at 3 a.m. and started looking at pornography on the computer." And his sponsor happened to be in that small group that we had broken into that night. If you don't know what a sponsor is, it's someone that walks alongside you and helps you, disciples you as you're walking through the Celebrate Recovery steps. And he looks at Tom and he says, "Tom," he goes, "why didn't you call me last night?" He goes, "I don't care if it's 3 a.m. He goes, "You could have just called me, told me you were struggling. We'll talk about sports or something to get your mind off of it." Something didn't sit right when I heard that either. So when everything was done, I walked back out. I had spoken for the end of the evening. And when everybody was gone, I asked the facilitator, I said, could we sit down and have a conversation for a second? I'd like to talk about a couple things. And I said, well, first of all, when we broke into small groups, Tom, who you know who he is, he confessed to us, that he hadn't even been sober for 18 hours. And his sponsor said, "Hey, Tom, just call me. We'll talk about sports to get your mind off of it." Now, I understand that for a moment might get his mind off of the act that he's doing, but the problem is his core didn't change. It's what we call behavior modification. Now, behavior modification has a place. Sometimes meds can have a place. But it's like when you think about the unhealthy fruit on a tree, like in Luke chapter 6, I think it's verses 43 to 45. It's going to come down to the root of the tree. Where are you planted? And so as I was telling the facilitator this, I said, but the other thing that bothered me was when he introduced himself. And he said, "Hi, my name is Tom. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I'm a sex addict and an alcoholic, and with that, I pass." He said, "Yeah, he's taking responsibility for his sin. He's confessing." And I said, "No. You're having him identify himself by his sin." He goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Listen to the difference to this. Hi, my name is Tom, and I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. But when I'm believing lies, I struggle with things like sex addiction and alcoholic." Did you hear the difference? It's huge. One is identifying yourself by your sin, which God never does. He's cast your sin as far as the east is from the west. There's still consequences for our sin. But my identity in Christ never changes just because I sinned. I get the consequence, which any good father would do for their child, right? But it's so important to understand where our one true identity comes from. And so many times we want to try to pick and choose, what sin is the worst or whatever, but it all comes down to the root. It's our identity. Because once we understand who we really are in Christ, that none of those other things that we want to run to complete us. As a matter of fact, it's going to make it worse for us. And we embrace who we are in Christ and that grace that you were given, that forgiveness, that mercy that you were given, that he gave you his name, like Paul talks about in Galatians chapter 2. I think it's verses 19, starts with 19, goes through 21. But your identity is in him. That is that 9-inch sheath knife. So let me kind of wrap it up with this. We see people trying to control other people. We try to move them out of the church, move them out of our life. There's a lot of guilting, shaming, shunning, and judging. And I don't know anybody who's ever been changed by that. And I was on a plane. Like I said, I speak all over the country for men's events and game dinners and all that kind of stuff. And I think I was speaking for a men's conference in California. And it was a Monday morning. I went to Indianapolis, so I got on a plane. And as I sit down, there's a woman sitting next to me, and I was tired. I just wanted to sleep. It's going to be like a 4-hour flight. And this woman is crying. I mean, you can hear it, and she's blowing her nose, and she's sniffling, and something was really hurting her. And I'm like, great. I just wanted to sleep because I knew God was going to say, I need you to talk to her. I'm like, okay, God, I don't have my wife with me. And he said, do you trust me? And I'm like, yeah. He said, I need you to speak to her. I said, okay. I said, are you okay? Mr. Empathy here, right? I said, are you okay? And she just kind of looks at me and she says, no. I said, yeah, I kind of guessed that. I said, what's going on? She said, well, I'm really sad. She said, yesterday we had to let someone go from our church. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. I said, was it someone on staff? She said, no, it was actually my best friend. I said, oh. I said, I'm truly sorry. I said, but I'm curious, why would they let go your best friend from church? They were asked to leave. She said, yeah. I mean, like, just like something, an argument happened. No, they wanted them out of the church. And I'm like, my mind is spinning here. Why would you remove someone unless they were like threatening to shoot somebody or beat somebody? What's the reason that's going on here? And so let me say this first. She was from a very, very works-based theology. I'm not going to say what denomination or theology or whatever she was buying into. It was very, very Old Testament based. Obviously, it wasn't the gospel of grace that we really know through Jesus Christ in the New Testament. But she said this person had a sin in their life and they weren't willing to change. And she says, I did exactly what the Bible says to do. She said, first thing, we're talking out of, well, I'll tell you in a second. She goes, I went to them and she wasn't willing to change. So I did the next step the Bible says to do, which is to take a witness. And so she says, I did. I went and got one of my friends that she knew, and we were trying to hold her accountable. And we told her that she needed to change, and she wasn't willing. Whatever this sin was, she wasn't willing to change. She goes, so at that point, we did what the Bible says, which is to take it before the church. And we did that. And she still wasn't willing to change this behavior. And so at that point, unfortunately, we had to do what the Bible says. And I said, well, what does the Bible say? She says, well, the Bible says at that point that you're to treat them like a pagan and tax collector. I said, what does that mean to you, to treat someone like a pagan and tax collector? She said, well, I was always taught it means shake the dust off your feet and have nothing to do with them. Again, I don't know anyone who's ever been changed by, shaming, judging, guilting, shunning, anything like that. And so I did. I said, well, where's that passage found? She said, well, it's in Matthew. I said, oh, that's right. And then I said, and how did Jesus treat tax collectors? Father God, we just come to you right now, and we confess our need for you. And we confess that we can't fix and control anyone. All we can do is speak the truth, because that truth is the weapon that we have. We are transformed through the renewing of our mind, not by casting mud on someone else, not by throwing someone out, but just like treating someone like a pagan and tax collector. What that means is we begin again because they didn't see their need for change. God will reveal it when we stay in the game, when we keep loving them through the difficult things they're going through, and speak the truth in love, and letting them know, I'm going to be here with you through this because I care about you. It was love that changed me. It was love that changed all of us. And it was that understanding, that aha moment, that we were given something that we didn't deserve, which was grace. And the beautiful thing is that grace always leads to obedience. Condemnation changes no one. But the beautiful thing about conviction is that it always leads to repentance and obedience. Father, teach us how to wield the weapon that you've given us with your word, with your love, with your care, so that when the enemy comes after us, we can remember that our identity is totally in you, that our righteousness comes from you, and that righteousness as a believer doesn't change because we sinned. Yes, there's consequences, but the beautiful thing is you've cast our sin as far as the east is from the west. That you're not keeping a record of wrongs, that you remember them no more. Help us to remember the grace that we were given, so that when we move into somebody else's life, where we can see actively, because we have a relationship with them, that they are struggling with something, that we can care more about them than where they're acting out. And allow that relationship to be focused on you and guide us into all truth. Thank you, God, for giving us your one true identity in Jesus Christ. We are so grateful. In Jesus' name, amen. See you guys.
Elevate your hunt with Brenton USA's modern AR rifles, where each feature is engineered with precision for the hunter's advantage. Our exclusive Brenton Hunt Spec 3-prong approach offers a seamless blend of form and function, transforming the AR rifle into a masterpiece of hunting engineering. With features like marble coat camo and our patent-pending receiver lock, every Brenton rifle is a beacon of innovation. Achieve unparalleled balance, durability, and accuracy in even the most challenging conditions. Make every shot count with a rifle built on a legacy of hunting mastery. Head over to BrentonUSA.com to transform the way you hunt.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Asio Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, welcome everyone to the Chasing Giants podcast special edition. We've talked about this for a couple weeks. We got our friends from Brenton Firearms on this episode, and Don's going to talk in just a little bit. Before he does that, I want to introduce our friends Nick Carpenter and Evans up in the top right-hand corner. You guys have been big supporters of our podcast. We first want to thank you for that. But today, it's a little bit different. Even though this podcast is about getting bucks within 20 yards of where we want to hunt as a bow hunter, a lot of our listeners are gun hunters, and we love that. There's obviously predator hunting and a lot of applications for firearms. So we wanted to have you guys on and cut to a few very important topics that we're going to tease up at the very beginning of this, and that is the caliber fads that are out there, speccing out different triggers for what different applications are there, and then also magazines. And I think those are three great topics that everybody can learn from. But before we get into that and have Nick and Evan talk a little bit about Brenton, Dawn, I want you to talk a little bit about why a bow hunting podcast and a guy like yourself who hasn't gun hunted in so many years decided to partner with a firearm manufacturer.
Well, like you mentioned, Terry, we're trying to appeal to a wide audience, and though I'm strictly a bow hunter today, I'm actually getting ready to shift away from that come the firearm season here in Illinois for the first time, because I've got a serious doe problem, overpopulation on my farm, and I need to put the herd on a bunch of does, and it's a whole lot easier to do it with a firearm than it is a bow. But, like a lot of hunters, I shot my first deer with a firearm and did that for several years until I eventually became strictly a bow hunter. I mentioned I'm going to use the gun again this year for some doe control, but I've also got a couple of grandsons that are getting into deer hunting, and it's a whole lot easier to start a youth with a gun than it is with a bow. So, we're just trying to appeal to everyone. And, most of us deer hunters are also coyote hunters, doing predator control on our farms as well. So, I'm pro-gun, always have been my entire life, and I've never, even though I'm strictly a bow hunter, I have absolutely nothing against the firearm hunters. I think it's a necessary part of managing a deer herd. So, trying to appeal to everyone a little bit here.
We'll talk a little bit about the quick history and introduce your relationship. We've talked a little bit about this in the past, but we have a lot of new listeners about why Nick Carpenter and Brenton. You guys go way back from other dealings even before he was affiliated with a gun manufacturer.
Yeah, so I met Nick, it's been, I'm just going to guess, probably 10 years ago maybe. He held an event. Yeah, he held an event on his farm in Michigan, a QDMA event, and I was the guest speaker at that event. And, I've through social media and such, I've kind of kept up with Nick, and he's a high quality person. That's the big thing. We're looking to partner, always have been, with the right people and the right companies. And the right company really boils down to the right people behind that brand, whatever it may be. And I've always known Nick to be that kind of person. And when he got into the firearm business, manufacturing these Brenton Firearms, it was a no-brainer. I had a couple grandsons that were just getting old enough to start going to the deer woods, and in the their home state of Indiana, they can use a rifle as we can now in Illinois. We couldn't until just a year or two ago. And it was just a perfect fit as much for the people as it was the product.
Yeah. So, Nick, talk a little bit about, before we get into these three main topics we want to talk about with calibers, triggers, and magazines, talk a little bit about how you got first involved with Brenton Firearms, and then talk about your main man, Evan, and bringing him on board and what he does for your business.
Sure. So I got into Brenton. First, I bought one. Michigan's a big straight wall cartridge that when they released that, we were always using slug guns before that. So when they started with the straight wall stuff, we started looking into how or what we could use. And we kind of settled on the modern hunting rifle there. So I did some research, bought a Brenton, loved it. A few months after that, a friend of mine bought the company. And so then I kind of became more involved with it, helping out, doing some things here and there for him, advertising. And I just fell in love with the whole brand and the whole idea. And then I knew at some point I just wanted to be a part of it or own it. So when the opportunity came, that's what I did. As far as Evan goes, Evan comes from the firearms background. He's worked in the industry, 7, 8 years, Evan, somewhere in there?
It's going on 7, yeah.
Yeah. So he had a really great background, and we were looking for a great sales guy. And he also does our marketing and media too. So, I mean, he's kind of got 5 or 6 hats if you ask him. But he keeps the wheels going and new innovations, things like that, things that we're going to be doing for next year. He's always constantly looking for that kind of stuff. I never have to guess what I guess I do have to guess what we're going to do next, but he's always got something new for me.
He's got choices, right?
That's right. We've always got options. We can go to this, or this. What do you think? So yeah, he handles that kind of things, and I mean, I just ship him out the door.
Yeah. So Evan, you've been with Brenton how long now?
I just had my 1-year anniversary the first week of October.
Yeah. So Evan, you actually live closer to me in the Cincinnati, Ohio area. You've actually worked at places that I used to do sales calls at. So, I mean, it was a small world when you joined the team and reached out to us after Nick had kind of finalized the agreement with Chasing Giants. So I want to dive into the meat and potatoes of this. And, I'm going to open up this topic to both of you, because I think for the average hunter and people trying to learn, whether it's archery or firearms, these fad calibers, and I call them fad, and that means, what I mean by that is not derogatory. It means that they're so niche of caliber. It's not like what we used to grow up with, a 243, a 270, and a 30-06. Those were the 3 rounds that my grandpa had that I knew they were deer rifles, right? Now we get into all of these other specialty rounds, and some of them apply to the black rifle format, some of them don't. But let's just talk a little bit about the shelf life of some of these newer rounds that come out. What is it being driven by, the ammo side? Is it being driven by the firearm side? You guys can just run with that a little bit. I'm curious.
Yeah, it's 100% driven by the ammunition side. I would say that if you see the military using it, it'll stick around a lot longer than if it's just the average consumer using it.
Right.
For example, a new fad is the 6-ARC. Military is using that. That's how it became available for us to use. That's how the need came and the niche came. I can think of a couple right off the top of my head, but Evan, I bet you could think of more that have kind of flopped in the last year or two.
Yeah.
224 Valkyrie, I think, is one that I would say flopped pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because there's so much crossover. When you have something like a 30-06, if you were so inclined, you could coyote hunt with it. You can deer hunt with it. You can it's a versatile round. But they find the need for, they want to come out with less recoil. When you get a less recoil, you go to a smaller projectile, then you're trying to push it faster. So there's a lot of calibers that tend to cross over. If you look at the 22 projectiles, there's 22 Nosler, there's 223. Both of those have very close similarities. The 224 Valkyrie that Nick just spoke about, that one's been kind of on the way out. It never really got off and running. It was proposed to be the new catch-all varmint caliber. And now we see the new introduction of 22 ARC, which is essentially 224 Valkyrie rebranded. It does have a different parent case. There is a lot more support, and they're working with more barrel manufacturers and more manufacturers in the industry as a whole to make sure there are guns available. You tend to see that a lot also, where they launch an ammo and there are no guns available. You'll see reloading dies, you'll see parts and components for guys to build rifles and to do different things and rebarrel things. But as far as I want to walk into a gun shop and I want to buy a gun that fits this new caliber, you don't really see that, as support. But Hornady seems to be doing a better job with the 6 ARC than they did the 22 ARC. Now they have a new one that they just announced this week. I think they announced like 3 or 4 new ammos this week. So they're constantly looking, the ammo manufacturers are looking for new ways to push boundaries. And it tends to be, well, this one can be used here and it does better job than this one. And it's up to the consumer to decide, is this a need that I have? It gives us an excuse to buy a new gun. At the end of the day,
or make a new barrel.
With ammo, I'll keep buying new rifles. I'm not complaining, but yeah.
Well, I know one of our guys on the Chasing Giants TV team is going to be doing some testing on that 22 ARC for you guys during coyote season. Our friend Brandon Epperson, who's really gotten into thermal hunting, where it's here in Kentucky especially, and he's going to be testing that for you guys. And we're going to talk a little bit about a different project we're working later in the podcast. Let's talk a little bit about 6mm ARC, because if you go and Google anything as far as centerfire rifles right now, I don't know if there's more SEO power behind it or it's just the number of people looking for it. 6mm ARC seems to be getting a whole lot of attention, but I was not aware, Nick, that is a military round. What did that come from?
Yeah, so in the development of the 6 ARC, and I'll probably get it all wrong, but they reached out to us because as Hornady started producing that, they reached out to us, the military did, to see what we were using for mags because they couldn't get their mags to function. And we had figured out a little bit of that, but they're looking at that as their new sniper rifle. So their long distance rifle is what they're planning on using that for. So special forces stuff is what that kind of derives from. And again, as long as they're picking it up, I think that's partly why you see so much ammo and availability is because the military is picking that stuff up.
Yeah, they're not going to bounce around and do something every other year once the military locks in with an RFQ and people start building pieces for those bid requests. It's going to stick around. What type of grain is available in that 6 ARC?
They go from like in the 90s to like 109 is where you're starting to press it, because the military, they'll, like you just spoke about, they have an RFQ and it's usually for a round to do a certain task or for a firearm to fit an overall footprint. And so with the 6 ARC, they're looking for force multipliers. They're looking to have their guys carry less ammunition, but still have the lethality at distance. And so with that 6 ARC, it is a true 1,000-yard round for the AR-15 platform. So, speaking the difference between AR-15 to AR-10, you have a longer projectile, bigger parts, usually about 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds difference between the two platforms. And so they want the lightest overall package that they can carry with the most lethality at distance. And the 6 ARC is surprisingly one of those ones where it didn't get off the ground running super hard. It came out mid-COVID. It kind of fell on everybody. Nobody really wanted to shut down ammunition lines when ammo shortages, 5.56, 9mm. Everybody was running the stuff that they knew was in demand and didn't have the bandwidth to put up a new caliber. And it seems like in the last year and a half is when that's really started taking off. And it's not only just in the hunting community because it's super effective, super flat shooting, but also a lot of guys that precision shoot, the more tactical guys that like to reach out long distance, the difference of taking an upper off a 5.56 and putting on a 6mm arc upper. So they have a lot of cross compatibility. So it seems there's definitely probably some SEO power behind it, Terry, but it seems like organically it's touching all the different factions of the shooting sports community, and people are finding a way to utilize it because it is just a super versatile round. I mean, 109 grain projectile, you're talking being able to reach out and take down whitetail with that. A lot of people consider it the 243 of the AR-15 or the modern. We like to call it the modern hunting rifle or modern sporting rifle, but of that platform. So it's a way to take a smaller package and still have the same effect.
Well, I was just that you read my mind with that, because think of Don for an example, where he wants a versatile. Maybe it's just he wants one gun purchase, and have one ammo. That using a 223 on a whitetail, people do it, but it's just not enough horsepower, right? So in Don's case, where you'd want to shoot does, but you also want a coyote hunt, that would be a really versatile round. That's kind of like would be fine in both environments, right?
We've had guys out in Montana taking bear with it. So,
Holy cow.
It'll do everything. I mean, obviously those are well-placed shots, but they're still taking 400-yard shots at bear with it out in Montana. So I'm confident that, mule deer, bear, antelope, I mean, we've shot all of those, so I know it'll do that. I've been impressed with the round all the way around.
We all know in situations like Don has with his grandson's hunting, this style of platform of rifle, low recoil, the way the bolt comes back, and it's a gas-activated piece of equipment, and especially with collapsible buttstocks, getting kids involved with this style of platform is a really, really good way to introduce people, or especially young people. So before we move to the next topic, let's talk a little bit about straight wall cartridges, because so many of our hunters in Ohio, Michigan, Illinois are now able to use it. Don mentioned it. It just got changed, Don, 2 years ago, I believe. This will be the third year, I believe. Right. And there's even a new caliber there that I'm going to be testing for you all this year, and that's the 400. So break down. It's one of those things that depends on who you talk to, whether people like 350 or 450. If you guys were going to give some advantages, disadvantages of those calibers, and then explain where this new 400 fits in.
Yeah, man. I mean, the easiest way to break it down, and this is like at a very basic level. If you think handgun ammunition, you have 9mm. Compare that to a 350 Legend. It's a 3.55 projectile. Then you have the 400 Legend. That would be equivalent to like your 40 Smith & Wesson. And then you have your 450 Bushmaster, which we would equate to like a 45 ACP. Now, they're not all the exact same size, different projectile, but just to kind of break it down on a basic level. 350, you have very flat shooting, smaller projectile, lighter grain weight. You have the 450, which is the king of weight, but you're also going to have a different flight pattern, more arcing flight pattern at distance. And then you have your 400 Legends, which fits in the middle. So with each one, you gain about, going from 450 down to 350, you gain 50 to 75-ish yards of, shooting ability. And when I say shooting ability, I mean like easy shooting ability, maximum point blank aim. Your 450 is really good for those easy shots, 175 and in. 400 Legend is supposedly, there's a lot of testing yet to be done. It's still a new caliber that came out, but you're talking 225 and in, and then your 350 Legend is 250, 275. You can push each one of those out past distance, with proper shooting technique, scope, if you have a BDC reticle, things like that. But the king of weight, knockdown power has been the 450 for years. It still kind of dominates. He's finding its way in the dark horse in the ring that nobody really knows about yet, because there's one manufacturer in Winchester making the 400 Legend with a couple different grain weights. But we saw an opportunity to jump into the 400 ring because, as we were talking about with ammo manufacturers, they come out with ammo and there aren't really many guns available. There are a couple different bolt gun manufacturers that have 400 Legend, and there's, to my knowledge, one other company that's manufacturing a modern hunting rifle like we produce in the 400 Legend. So we're kind of new to the rodeo, and hopefully guys jump behind the ammo, and we're a go-to for that. But we're excited to see what it does.
I can say that the 400 Legend is probably still going to be a lethal 250-yard gun. Both the 350 and 450, in my experience, are lethal out to 250. I don't think that 400 is going to pack any more power than your than your 450, obviously. But it's for those guys who were having that complaint in the 350 that they weren't getting enough knockdown power or enough blood trails. That's what this is supposed to fix.
I get you.
But we'll see. You're going to test it. I'm going to test it. I mean, that's what this is all about.
So
Don,
for a
as
guy
we
that
travel around and go to these trade shows, you know, a lot of times they have gun auctions and different things, and these straight wall cartridges have become a really pivotal tool for gun hunters to use with their plans. I know you probably see it a lot with your consulting clients too.
Yeah, and you know, one thing I'm curious about, so with a Brenton rifle, could a guy go from 350 to 450 with just a barrel change?
Just
Yeah,
an upper
absolutely.
receiver swap. Over Nick's left shoulder there, those are all upper receivers of different calibers. So once you have one rifle,
Which is this one?
you just buy a secondary upper receiver, and you can, I mean, we do 13 different calibers. It's easier to say what we don't do than it is to what we actually do. But, you know, if you can hunt with it and it's a pretty readily available known ammunition, you can buy an upper receiver from us to cover that.
Typically Go ahead.
I was thinking of the deer hunter who maybe has kids that are getting into it. He could have a 350 upper,
Sure.
you know, for his kids, and then switch out to 450 or whatever for himself.
And we
Absolutely.
do. I've got a 350 sitting on that gun there, and I've got a 400 or 450 there. It's literally two pins in a magazine. So you have to have your 450 mag, and you're just 2 pins. Pull those 2 pins, put the other one up on it, and you're good to go.
You'll obviously want to confirm 0 just to be safe.
Absolutely. But
9 times out of it, and everything mates up. We run with extreme tight tolerances between our upper and lower fitment. So from one upper receiver that you buy from us to the next, you're going to get consistency, and that's a big thing.
absolutely.
So yeah.
Yep.
But Don,
Good to know.
you've had more recent experience with teaching a young hunter how to shoot, you know, with your grandson Walker, and I know Corey spends a lot of time with him in this, but you can probably vouch for it. The more we can get a kid more comfortable behind the buttstock and not have him flinching, which lends itself to this style rifle so much. Everybody gets scared of it, and all the liberals start freaking out about it. But at the end of the day, I still believe 100%, and you can tell me what you think, since you've been most recently in this game. This style of rifle is perfect for low recoil and fitting a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. Recoil with a kid, getting them started is absolutely the key to keeping them interested. You know, if they're flinching every time they're pulling the trigger, they're probably going to miss more times than they hit and get discouraged. So, especially if they may be wounded animal. So that low recoil is very important.
Yep. All right. Well, he mentioned triggers. Let's move to our second topic, and that is triggers. One of the things that since I've worked with gun manufacturers from the manufacturing side so many years, you know when somebody puts a lot of money inside the gun, and that's the trigger assembly that comes into it. But at the same time, different applications lend itself for different things. The guy that's doing a 3-gun shoot is going to be different than a guy that's deer hunting out of a tree stand. Nick, Evan, walk us through kind of what should be a starting point for somebody looking and they want to do something than just out of a box Savage or Mossberg rifle, but they want to look at something that's going to fit them a little bit better. What triggers lend themselves better to what applications when we're talking deer hunters? And that's who most of our listeners are, is deer hunters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really great question. It's so multi-tiered because there's so many different directions that you can go. But I know when I'm looking for a trigger myself, predictability and consistency is the number one driver. You want to know that each time you put your finger on that trigger, the pull is going to be the same. It's going to be consistent break. It's going to be a consistent reset, because with, you know, the types of firearms that we're doing, they're semi-auto. So as soon as you pull that trigger, you're letting your finger go back forward. You've got another round going in there. There is no more recycling of the bolt. So in a bolt gun, your finger comes off the trigger to cycle the rifle again. That's why bolt action rifles I mean, Nick and I were just at a trade show. What was that trigger, Nick? Like, it was 5 ounces.
Yeah.
For a bolt action. I mean, you could blow on it and essentially set this thing off. And with a bolt action, you're not having to worry about it. So you can go incredibly light. You know, there are competition shooters that go even lighter than 5 ounces, to where and in certain situations that becomes unsafe because you're unable to then give your gun to a friend and say, shoot this, if they don't really have familiarity with your firearm. So the good spot for deer hunters, again, predictability, consistency. We found that 3.5 pound is the perfect spot to do that. That allows you to put your finger on the trigger. You don't have to worry about it going off until you want to pull it, because 3.5 pounds is enough to, poundage where you have to actually work to get it to go off. But then I think we lost Nick there, but so it's you get consistency and predictability. So 3.5 pounds is where we found is a good spot. Gloves, cold weather, it's just a really great spot to be.
Asio Gear has perfected one of the most innovative camo patterns on the market. The unique camo pattern designed to mimic the feather patterns of one of North America's greatest predators, the great horned owl. Combined with intuitive features, superior comfort, and ultra high quality fabrics, give bow hunters the ultimate advantage. Asio has outfitted over 10,000 bow hunters across the country with over 1,000 5-star reviews. Visit asiogear.com to check it out for yourself. Use code CHASINGGIANTS for 15% off.
Remington Model 11.
Yeah, so it's hard to tell what pull that gun had from when it was originally built, but I think it's a great, huh? Don when he was younger had a really, really strong finger.
Yeah.
But as Nick, Evan, as guys are on this transition of possibly looking at a more modern rifle, especially in states that's gone from shotgun to straight line, outside of just saying a 3.5 pound trigger, is there something they need to watch for? Because you can go, some of these rifles have been commoditized so much over the years that, you can buy one of these rifles in a class for $500-600, but you're getting what you're paying for, especially with that trigger. If just take a couple minutes, is there something folks can look for when they know that they're going with a quality, reliable trigger on a platform like this?
Well, it looks like Nick's getting what we've actually made a change internally, what we're going to. So the biggest thing is, obviously a reputable manufacturer, and they're easy to spot. Reviews are great. YouTube, that's probably one of the number one search things of, what is a good trigger. And coincidentally, with new triggers, and especially, the style that we use, it's called a cassette trigger. So it used to be that there was multi-parts, multi-springs. It was a difficult process to change your trigger out. But now it's all a self-contained module. And they'll drive out 2 pins. Your other one comes out. If you are buying just a standard off-the-shelf rifle, it might be one of those triggers that has multiple parts and multiple springs, and it's under spring tension. So it might be a little bit difficult to get out. But these new ones, they just fall right in. You put the pins back in, and then there's usually tensioning screws that go down to hold the trigger in place. But a reputable manufacturer, we have elected to go with Trigger Tech. They are extremely well known in the bolt action world. The trigger that we were looking at, that was 5 ounces. It happened to be a Trigger Tech, and they've gotten into the AR, the modern sporting rifle style triggers. And so we've elected to go with them for all the reasons that I mentioned in my first talking points of a trigger.
So that's a standard trigger across the whole different lines. And I guess this would probably be a good point, because I'm guessing listeners right now are probably going to the Brenton website and they're seeing 3 variations of different series of guns: the guide, the scout, and the tracker. Are all 3 of those going to have the same trigger in them?
All the scout, the tracker will have the same trigger. And then the guide rifle will actually have one of those triggers that I described, a multi-part. The term is mil-spec. It's typically the trigger that's found in a military, style rifle. The difference with ours and our mil-spec is that there's actually some polishing that goes into play. We actually use a lighter weight spring So as far as just standard off the shelf triggers, I have a lot of familiarity, Terry and Don, with like the AR platform. It is the best out of the box mil spec basic trigger that you can get in a rifle. When you get into the trigger tech, that's when you start to see a big jump forward, and you'll understand that the 3.5 pounds, the reset is completely different. But yeah, so we're pleased to start putting these triggers in our rifle. We actually got away from doing ours, so that your listeners that may have a Brenton rifle or are familiar with us, we are still working through some of the inventory that we have of our Brenton triggers. Still a great trigger, phenomenal trigger. We have just elected to get away from the manufacturing side of it, just because it is such an intricate part. It's the machinability, manufacturing it's difficult to do. So we have elected to go with something that we believe is just as good, if not a little bit better, because that is all Trigger Tech does, is triggers.
Those little nuances. When we were asked to build something that was a little bit less expensive, to kind of aim for a different market, that's where that guide came from. But like anything we do, we really didn't want to take a lot away from it. So we found a few things we could to drive that down. But really, the guide series is a great entry rifle. It's what both of my kids shoot. You know, that's what they hunt with. You know, it comes in one color. Currently, it comes in the gray, or what we call midnight, and it comes in a limited caliber options. I'm pretty sure that I don't really remember the caliber options, but I bet Evan does. And then the tracker, yeah. And the other is an 18-inch or 22-inch barrel. So there's those options as well. For the guy that really wants to use a canner or a suppressor, we run those 18-inch barrels as well.
Yeah. So different price point, different bells and whistles, but same shooting quality and accuracy that you're going to get across the board. All right. Well, the biggest thing Don and I don't want to do with this podcast is give out legal advice. And the next segment I want to talk about is magazines, and I'm going to urge people, you need to understand what your state requires, because I know when we use this platform in Illinois, there's all kinds of communist laws coming down on Don as an Illinois resident when it comes to this style of rifle. That'll get us flagged on YouTube for sure. But when we're talking about magazines, you know, I know in Illinois you basically have to choke this thing down to a single shot, and there's a solution for that. But you also have solutions for other states. So without being state specific and saying Michigan is this and Illinois is this, go through some of the options you guys can provide so that consumers understand that no matter what their state law is, you can be compliant.
So our mags are made in 10-round bodies and 20-round bodies, and those bodies are considered 223 bodies. So they can stuff 20 rounds of 223 in them, or they can stuff 10 rounds of 223 in them. We make limit blocks. So there's a little orange block in the bottom of these mags that limit your rifle to 5 rounds. I know other states, some states are 3, some are 1, some are this. For us, 5 rounds is what we send them out at. Every mag or every gun you get comes with 2 mags, so that's what we send our mags out with. And yeah, you're right. Every state is different. We do have a solution for Illinois. If you're traveling to Illinois to hunt, obviously, get a hold of us. We can help you out with that. I think there's a few other ones out east. They're the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody has a little.
Speaking a little bit more about it, like our magazines, you know, what kind of separates, because a consumer can just log on and see a magazine as a magazine. We've gone through for all 13 calibers that we do, and we do caliber specific. So when you buy a 450 magazine, it's going to be 450 specific all the way down to 22 nozzler. And we did that by measuring the individual compression and rebound rates of the springs to make sure, you know, 450 spring is going to be different than a 22 nozzler. The follower is going to be different. That's the plastic piece that the bullet rests on. So we put a lot of time and energy into our magazines to make sure that the end consumer is getting a magazine that's going to feed and cycle their round that they're shooting. And unfortunately, you kind of see that, you know, people buy a rifle and you expect it to work, and the rifle isn't working, and they chuck it up that it's the rifle's fault. But oftentimes it's a $15 magazine that the manufacturer just put in there to run with the gun. So, you know, if anything, if people have already a 450 or a 350 or 6mm arc. Those are the three big problem ones out there. And your gun isn't running and cycling ammunition properly. If you give our magazines a shot, it's anywhere from they run from like $26.99 to $29.99. They could solve that problem for you.
Yeah, I mean, when we put the money, Don, you can speak to this. When we put the money we do into tree stands, food plots, switchgrass, taking a short change on details like a magazine, it could cost you a shot at $1, right? It's amazing how many times we take a shortcut on the easy stuff.
Absolutely.
The cost of a magazine is nothing. That's not even a set of batteries in a trail camera.
Well, guys, those are the three big topics, but I want, before we hang up here, there's obviously been some, hard pivoting and direction with growing Brenton, and, we wanted to help with Chasing Giants to try to get that word out. What new is coming out as far as the company? Do you want to talk about? And then we need to talk about where people's going to be able to not only find these rifles, but contact you guys with questions. So from a 30,000-foot view down to a little bit closer, talk about the future of Brenton and where it's going, and then where we can find you guys.
Sure. So we're going to have some new caliber stuff coming through. Obviously, the 22 ARC and 400 Legend are this year's big platform pushes. The 22 ARC, they're in right now and will be ready to ship here shortly. That's our huge announcement for this year, was obviously 22 ARC, 6 ARC, and 400 Legend, I guess it was the other one. Next year, that's so up in the air. But right now we've got some products that we're testing out. We got some new stocks. We've got a few options for handguard options. We've talked about making a few different colors. We've talked about making some different camo patterns. We're really, well, like I said, when I say that Evan comes up with new ideas every week, he comes up with new ideas every week. So we've looked at a lot of that stuff. We're not 100% sure. I can tell you with certainty that we're going to come out with a black rifle, which we never thought we would do. So I know where that's going to be available for the guy that wants to paint his own or do his own stuff with his own gun. Other than that, we're going to be at a ton of trade shows this year, all the FAE stuff. We're going to go to Iowa Classic again. I loved that show. That was a great, fun weekend. There's one in Ohio, correct, that we're going to, Evan?
I believe,
and
the open show.
Obviously, we'll be at the Shipshewana show again, because that's just basically our backyard.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Shipshewana. The Midwest Sportsman's Classic, sponsored by FAE. You guys got to experience that. Talk a little bit about how that show is a little bit different for you. We got an unbelievable opportunity coming back again this year with the crew that's doing the roundtable. The Wenzel brothers and Bobby Worthington and Al Foster and Don and Joe Miles. From a vendor that walked in there, this is a selfish plug for the folks there. The people that are still considering being at that show in Shipshewana, talk a little about your all's experience with it.
Yeah, so I mean, the show in Shipshewana was game changing for me. Just the sense of community, the welcoming of the people that were there, the engagement, this style of questions. I've done trade shows for years. I've been to them all. I've been to Terrible Las Vegas, to SHOT Show, and all of them. And I've never had an experience with an end user or the general public like I had in Shipshewana. The types of questions, the detail-oriented questions. There was a genuine curiosity to the why. I'm usually on guard when I'm at trade shows. It's usually, well, tell me why I need to buy yours over this person's. Versus going there, it was a genuine wanting to understand the quality, the control, and then the people who are behind the business. So I think it speaks to, FAE, the Meg Center, the community around Shipshewana, what they're drawing in, what you guys are doing, tip of the hat to you guys, because you can tell the level of care that went into that show, I'd say far and above any other one. So if there's a vendor that's on the fence, I find it hard to understand why they would be that way.
Well, while Nick's trying to get his video feed going back, we're gonna talk about something he might not want to release. While the boss is gone, we're gonna talk about a little tease something. Yeah. And that is, it's not available for the public, but we are working on a Chasing Giants edition Brenton rifle right now, dipped in Asio. and some of our team members for the show is going to have these this year. And I think you said that mine's actually going to be on display at Shipshewana, so people are going to see these pieces dipped in Asio, and you never know, based on the interest level of people that want it, we could have Brenton rifles dipped in Asio with maybe even a Chasing Giants logo on it one day. What do you think?
I mean, I think it would be great. You know, the Asio pattern is something, you know, I've been around hunting for a while, and I was introduced to it when I came home with Brenton. I understand the why behind it. It looks good when it's outlaid on fabric, so why not put it on a rifle as well? So it is a pet project that we're working to bring to the table. You know, we're not trying to, what's the adage, tee it up too much for the end consumers, but you know, we would be genuinely interested in feedback, and the first place that they'll be on display for the public, aside from, you know, content that we'll be releasing on social media, likely will be at the show in Chipsy. So it'd be pretty cool, you know, to have people come by and engage the interest, and then maybe we can go down and talk to the Asio guys and see if we can put something together. But in the meantime, we still have 5 different color options. We have all of our guns in camo. Nick said we're coming out with the black one. I'm obviously pressing to have some other ones brought to the table as well. So we will have plenty of options in the meantime. So we encourage people to, you know, check us out. Our rifles are found at dealers all over the place. So we have the couple shops in the Dutchman's in the Shipshewana area. I don't want to get in too much trouble calling out people and forgetting some, but we're all over Michigan, have several dealers in Ohio, and we're looking to go beyond. So if you have a local gun shop in the area and you want to go in and bring us up and ask about us, all they have to do is reach out, and we'd be happy to get them set up as a dealer. We're really approachable and easy to work with. They'd be dealing with me, so I hope I come across that way anyway.
Don, when we first started Chasing Giants, did you ever think that at one day we'd be connecting dots with people like Brenton and Asio, and then maybe even having our logo on products somewhere? Could you ever believe it's come this far, buddy?
I did not see that happening. You know, when good people get together, we always try to support each other, and it's not a competition. It's lifting each other up, and we've done that with all our partner companies, and, you know, Brenton fits right into that. So if we can hook them up with Asio, that's just great for both companies, and good for us as well.
Yep. Well, Evan, I learned a lot today, and you know, especially with these calibers and triggers and magazines. So thank you guys for coming on. Before we sign off here, if somebody, whether they want to be a dealer, they got more questions, just if you don't mind, give you guys this contact information, and hopefully we'll connect some potential buyers through the end of this year and at trade show season next year.
Yeah. I'd be happy to do that. If you remember back to the original podcast, Nick was on about this time last year, maybe a little bit later, but he gave out my personal cell phone number to your listening audience because he didn't have the shop number right there in front of him. So he's like, I've got my sales guy. That was me. So I appreciate all the phone calls, you know, everybody that reached out to us. This time I will be giving out our shop numbers, so I apologize to our COO, Brandon, but they can reach us at area code 517-281-2571. Again, it's 517-281-2571. That is our shop number. You can give us a call. We'd be happy to discuss differences in rifles, calibers, you know, different things like that. We can take orders over the phone. If not, we have, you know, sales at Brenton USA. That's a great place for people to reach out to. And then for those of your listening audience that are on social media, that's where we're going to be teasing out a lot of our new product releases and getting information out very quickly. So we're on Instagram, Facebook. Yeah, so all the major social media platforms, but working to build up a YouTube channel of just product information, product spotlights, things like that. So
there he is. He's back. We're just finishing up, buddy.
Thank goodness. I knew somebody would take over while I was robbing my wife of her phone to get this done.
All kinds of trade secrets. I promised them the world, Nick. So many new things are coming from Brenton. You're going to be so excited.
Great.
Yeah.
Can't wait to hear about it.
He just told us that last time you gave out his personal cell number. I didn't realize that. That's pretty funny.
I did too. Totally did.
He just gave out yours, so now you get to
That's
answer all the
all right.
calls.
It's on Billboard, so we're
You're
no
welcome,
big deal.
Bud. You might sell a couple roofs while you're at it. You never know.
Perfect.
Yeah. So we do appreciate you guys. Like I said, so many listeners of our podcast come to us for different reasons. And there's the people that want to be Don Higgins' protege, where they get, 191-inch bucks within 7 yards and kill them with a bow. But there's a lot of people that come for tips and understanding that hunt different ways. And we desperately want to try to provide them information like you guys did today. I just told Evan I learned a lot in this episode, and I really appreciate your all's time to do that.
Absolutely.
Don, it's crazy to think, you mentioned it a little bit ago, that good people working together ends up usually with good outcomes. And obviously Brenton and all of our partners have really allowed us to stretch our wings and grow this into something much bigger than just you and I complaining about politics every week, or we're talking about deer hunting. But at the end of the day, we hope that we're a blessing to the guys at Brenton, just like they've been a blessing to us.
Absolutely, for sure. It's a partnership that I hope is around for a lot of years.
So, well, thanks for being on. Like I said, this was a little bit different. We wanted to go into detail, and that's why it was a special episode. Again, reach out to Brenton directly with any questions. And we look forward to seeing you guys, and especially on the trade show circuit. Don and I are going to be in Iowa also, so we'll probably be at the same food courts through the wintertime, eating chicken fingers and French fries. So look forward to seeing you guys. We appreciate you.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, we're bringing our big booth, so there'll be plenty of room to come by and hang out.
We'll definitely do that. Well, guys, thanks for being on. Make sure you check out Brenton's on their social media and on their website. Reach out to them with any questions. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you. We'll catch you next week.
Ever had a terrible real estate experience? Average realtors usually spend more time selling themselves than on selling your land. They'll tell you anything to get the listing. They know that if they get the listing, you're stuck with them. Not here. Midwest Land Group has changed the way land is sold and is the only brokerage to offer a 100% satisfaction guarantee. That means if we don't meet your expectations, you can fire us. That puts all the pressure on us to perform. We don't just list land, we sell it. If you're looking to buy or sell property, don't before you talk to us. Visit us at MidwestLandGroup.com.